Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're finally going to talk about the 8th house, my current obsession. After doing my solar return chart, finally, I realized why I'm so obsessed with the 8th house this year. The 8th house is ruled by Leo in my chart, and I'm having a solar year, and that explains a lot of why I'm so obsessed with the 8th house right now. And I've been meaning to put this together, and finally it's happening. So first I'm going to give you some background information on the 8th house and what it represents in astrology, talk a little bit about the differences in modern and traditional interpretations of the 8th house. I'm going to give you some symbolism that has helped me to understand the 8th house, and a character I'll talk to you about. You know how in the 12th house I talked about if you knocked on the door of the 12th house, somebody opened it, who would open it? I'm going to talk about a new person who would open the door for the 8th house for you if you actually knocked on it. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some tips that I've been using to connect with the 8th house. And most importantly, I'm not an 8th house person, so I'm really looking forward to hearing you guys' opinions and your experiences with the 8th house. I'm a Sagittarius person, so I'm always learning and I'm always looking to learn from people's first-hand experience. And if you have some cool 8th house stories, I really look forward to reading them in the comments, because as I said, I have no planets in the 8th house and I have no first-hand experience of this. So all that I know from the 8th house is really from meditating on its energy and from working with the symbolism that I see present in that house. So the 8th house is to me the most mysterious house of the zodiac. And even though the 4th house is very private, and even though the 12th house is mystifying in its own right, it contains things that are more understandable for the average person, I believe, because at least we all go to sleep. You know, it's the 12th house, the house of sleep. But I mean, yes, we also all die. The 8th house is a house of death. But after we die, we don't really know what happens. And after we're dead, we can't really know what death was like because we're dead, right? Unless you believe in reincarnation, which I don't really know. The jury's still out on that. So the 8th house is very mysterious. And the 8th house deals with several themes that I'm going to talk about. But one thing that I really want to preface this with that is very important to me in my astrological practice is that I don't put sex in the 8th house. And let me explain why. So modern astrology period tends to put sex in the 8th house, and I just don't see sex as an 8th house thing, strictly speaking. I do believe that sex can be an 8th house experience, but only some kinds of sexual experiences are 8th house sex experiences. Like for example, tantra and things that are more intense. And there are people out there in the world that are just having just like 5th house sex or 7th house sex. You know, there are people that are doing it for fun. There are people who are doing it out of partnership and out of just partnership love. And there are people that are doing more intense things. And I'm not saying that those things are bad, but I'm saying that not everybody has 8th house sex. There, I said it. Okay, so I don't put sex in the 8th house unless you are a person who expresses to me that sex is an 8th house matter to you and that is important to your chart. I will definitely take into account that information when I'm doing your chart, because I make charts very personalized, and if something like that is very important to you, I'll of course take that into account. But I myself don't include it in everybody's 8th house. I don't say like, oh, 8th house, you're gonna have a lot of sex. No. So the 8th house rules death and all the things that relate to death. So funeral homes, cemeteries, decay, loss, grief, all of the things that deal with death, you will find them in the 8th house. Also, sudden inheritances belong in the 8th house, whereas the 4th house is the things that your parents might leave you, like in your lineage, like family money. The 8th house is just like bam, like someone's dead and you get money, that type of inheritance. Secrets are also held in the 8th house. Debts and taxes are held in the 8th house. The occult, so all the occult things that are hidden that people don't normally talk about. Crisis, intense emotions, fear, anxiety, all of those things lie in the 8th house. So if you think about it, what do all those things have in common? Intense emotions, death, fear, anxiety, taxes, the occult. The thing that I feel that the underlying theme or the blanket that could cover all of these topics pretty broadly is intensity. just intense emotions deal with all of these topics. Being taxed, it takes away your money. So that is a burden that you have on yourself. Dying, grieving, all of those things are burdens, emotional burdens. So this house is a very intense house. It is full of crisis moments. So I would say that things that are emotionally difficult, that aren't just your average thing. Not everybody is going to experience things that are 8th house related. Another thing that sometimes gets put into the 8th house, that I do put into the 8th house, is taboos, because I do put that with secrets, things that are hidden away that we don't really want society to see. And why is it that we hide taboos? Well, because they can be shameful, and they can be especially shameful because we will be judged by society for them. And for that reason, we hide them in the 8th house. And all of the things that are going to be emotionally intense for us are going to produce emotional responses from others that are going to in turn make us emotional. Those are the things that get put in the 8th house. So even though the 12th house also holds fears, I feel that the fears, as me being a 12th house person, a person with a lot of phobias, I feel that the 12th house phobias are more repressed. Not repressed, but they're underlying. It's just like you live your life and you just have those fears and they're like dormant within you. And the fears that are in the 8th house are very physical and real and more intense, because even though I have phobias and I've lived with them, I wouldn't say that I would put PTSD more in the 8th house, I feel, because I feel that something like PTSD is very acute as opposed to just all your life. Whenever I had issues with my fears and my phobias, it was always underlying. It never came to a head. And 8th house fears, I really feel that those things either they come from emotionally intense experiences that you've had, like those that would cause PTSD, or the fears themselves are manifested in a very open and physical way. That is just my opinion. Please let me know your opinion or your experiences in the comments, because I'm very curious. I like to talk about the concept of the 8th house being separate from Scorpio, being separate from Pluto. And the reason for that, as I've said in my 12th house video, is because when we use the 12-letter alphabet, so the Aries equals Mars equals the first house, whenever we use that system, our interpretations can get muddy because everything ends up being the same thing. You have way more than 12 symbols to work with in astrology. So I think that it's really important to kind of clean up our work and make sure that we're not using the same symbolism for Pluto that you are for Scorpio, that you are for the 8th house. So as I said in the 12th house, I think that Scorpio does resonate with 8th house energy, but the house in the chart is the places where you will experience certain things. And Scorpio, the sign, just gives a type of energy to a planet. It gives it a flavor, a look, a costume, a type of behavior, but it's really the house itself that will tell you where you're going to experience certain things. So if you're going to experience just some really taboo, intense things that are going to happen to you, you're going to find it in the 8th house more often than not, or attached to the ruler of your 8th house. So even though Scorpio is inclined to 8th house things, they might like the appeal of the danger, of the intensity, but they might not, and they might be attuned to people suffering who have been through 8th house things. But I really feel that the 8th house is more about the experiences themselves and not just being attuned to that energy, you know? So people with 8th house planets will experience these difficult things in their life, and they won't just be attuned to that type of energy. And what I mean by attuned to that type of energy is how Scorpio people, they are attuned to people's suffering, and they are attuned to just darkness in the world. So if the 8th house was a real place and you could actually go there, where would it be? So I have some opinions about that. I think it could be a place like a brothel, and not just because it is sex, but because the people who work there, who work in sex work, are more taboo, right? Sex is still, for whatever reason, a very taboo subject in our society, likely because of Judeo-Christian values. So people who work in the sex industry do get stigmatized. So people that carry stigmas with them are eighth house people. And also maybe a dope house, so a place where people go to do drugs, to purchase and consume drugs. And what I mean by a dope house is not just people who do drugs, because some people do drugs recreationally and they can have a pretty healthy regular life, but people who are just like in a crack house, usually people who do drugs to that level is because they have gone through some type of trauma that really put them there. No one just like wakes up and is just like, oh, I'm gonna do a whole bunch of crack today. Nobody who has a healthy, balanced life and has happiness in their life really does that. I think that there's a difference between people who do drugs for 8th house purposes and 12th house purposes. I feel that drugs for 12th house purposes are more about escaping reality and just numbing yourself so that you're no longer present in your body. And 8th house type of drugs are, I know that there's people who do bad things just for the sake of being bad. Like they feel they want to be punished. And that intense emotion of wanting to be punished seems like an 8th house sort of thing. And lastly, a funeral home would be a place that could be the 8th house. And the reason for this is because, think about it, it deals with death. And not only that, but in funeral homes, you see a lot of people grieving. And sometimes there's a lot of guilt whenever there's a funeral. And I think this is because sometimes people don't really make peace with those who are dying. So there could be a lot of guilt surrounding funerals and surrounding people's deaths. So that's why there's a lot of intense emotions. And I feel that I hate going to funerals, man. So when you go to a funeral, I feel that the energy in the place is always so heavy, and it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it is a packed funeral or an empty one. The energy could be just so dense and so dark at funeral homes. So that's why I put them in the 8th house. If the 8th house had a landlord, if when you knocked on that door, somebody would open it for you, who would it be? I'm so excited to talk about her. So I really think that if the 8th house had a door, the person who would open it would be La Santa Muerte, La Santísima Muerte. And if you're not familiar with her, I just want to clarify, it's not the same thing as the Catrina. La Santa Muerte isn't necessarily directly associated with the Day of the Dead. La Santísima Muerte is a saint, a Mexican saint. And she is not like officially canonized, but there's a really strong cultural appreciation for her, and she has a lot of followers throughout the world. In the United States, there is even a chapel to her in New Orleans. I was living in Louisiana for a few years, and I'm so sad that I didn't get to go, but I look forward to visiting it. I'm not gonna go into too much detail. If you're curious about her, I'm going to leave a really cool documentary that I found about her on YouTube. I'm gonna link it in the description or the comments. So La Santa Muerte is really the patron saint of those who have been dejected by the Catholic Church. So in case you didn't know, Mexico is heavily Catholic, and the Catholic Church has a very strong hold on its people. And because of this, there are a lot of people who, because Mexico is so impoverished, there are a lot of people who are involved in organized crime. And La Santa Muerte ends up being the patron saint of a lot of people who experience a very intense life. So she's a patron saint of people who commit crimes, of people who do drugs, of people who are part of the LGBTQ community, and just rebels and outlaws altogether. And let me clarify that. So I'm not putting people who commit crimes and LGBTQ people like, oh, they're the same, oh, they're equal. No, I'm not saying that. First of all, I don't pass judgment on people for the life that they live. I very much understand that everybody's life is lived out based on the experiences that they've had. So I don't judge anybody, right? But the reason why she is a patron saint of those people is because in Mexico, still there is a very strong conservative environment, even though Mexico legalized gay marriage before US did. But nonetheless, there still remains a lot of stigma revolving around people that are a part of the LGBTQ community. And La Santa Muerte has accepted them for much longer than society as a whole has. And because of that, LGBTQ people feel very much loved and accepted by La Santa Muerte. And the reason why people who commit crimes or criminals or drug dealers or drug lords or outlaws go to her is, again, because the Catholic Church rejects those people. And they not only reject those people, but they also reject her. They reject La Santa Muerte. So I think that she really embodies that 8th house energy so beautifully. And I really feel that the Santa Muerte really reminds me of the 8th house because of the people that she deals with. It's just people who go through a lot of difficult things and people who are maybe living a life of crime. And if you think about it, especially in Mexico, people who are living a life of crime and are involved with organized crime, those people are in risk of death every single day. So really their connection to death is much stronger than the average person. You know, I might not connect with the Santa Muerte on a daily basis because I'm just sitting in my house and like my danger levels are pretty low. But let's just say that you are a drug dealer or you are crossing illegal immigrants across the river, or you are just doing all of these criminal activities that put you at risk of death, then you are really attuned to that 8th house energy. And I think that La Santa Muerte is a really good representation of that. So now I'm going to give you 4 tips on how you can get in touch with your 8th house. So the first one is occult practices. And even though some people would put astrology into the 8th house and call it an occult practice, I really don't. I think of astrology as a 9th house matter. So what I really consider an occult practice would be tarot. And I really love tarot. I've always loved it. But as I said, I'm having a very strong 8th house year and I've gotten more into it. And I've really been using tarot in a really cool, what I think is a really cool way. So tarot is a really wonderful way of connecting with the occult in a way that isn't so dangerous or risky. You just want to get yourself a tarot deck or get yourself a tarot reading. That's a good way of connecting with the 8th house. The second tip would be connecting with loved ones. So you can do this through journaling. You could maybe write letters to people who have died, who meant a lot to you, or even connecting with dead people that you admire and just writing letters to them and really putting yourself on that wavelength that you're kind of open to people who have died. And when it comes to talking to dead people or talking to spirits or people who have passed on, I think that I've read books about this, and I think that the important thing is to put yourself on that wavelength and be like, I'm open to this kind of energy. And in that manner, the people that might want to contact you will contact you because you have left yourself open. And I'm not really scared of it, but some people are. It depends what your religious beliefs or your spiritual beliefs tell you about this. I myself am not scared about it, and as long as your spiritual practice is fulfilling you and you're not hurting anybody, there's no reason not to be open to it. So this is what I'm doing. It's working for me. It's making me very happy. It's fulfilling me, and I just wanted to share it in case it would help anybody else. So the next thing that you could do is you can actually serve the community, that actual community of people who are sex workers or people who are dejected by society. You can somehow volunteer at an organization that works with them. That is one of my dreams, is to not to work in sex work, but to help people that have been abused, because oftentimes people who work in the sex industry are people who have had really difficult lives. There's people who do it just because they love having sex and that's why they work in the sex industry, but oftentimes people end up working there because they feel that they have no other recourse in life, and they end up being abused by the people that they work for and with. If you are interested in doing that and you find a way to do that, that would be a great way to connect with the 8th house. The last thing you could do is you could connect with dark gods and goddesses like La Santa Muerte or Kali. But I want to make a disclaimer that I myself don't work with La Santa Muerte or dark gods and goddesses. I know that a lot of people do, and my only disclaimer is that when you open yourself to a certain kind of energy and vibration, you are inviting that type of energy into your life. So if you find yourself working with a deity that is dark and is associated with death or just darker themes, then you should not be surprised if those themes pop up in your life, or you're more aware of that type of energy around you, and that could be rather heavy. And I know myself, and I know that I am very easily bogged down by heavy energies, so I know that I can't work with her. And even though I love her very much, I respect her, I do not work with her in my daily practice, and I'm not suggesting that you do, but it's definitely an option if you are curious about her, if you feel called by her or another dark goddess, then that is a wonderful way of connecting with the 8th house. And really, especially if you're an 8th house person, you might be more drawn to those types of themes. So that's the video for today, guys. I hope you liked it. And if you have any 8th house stories, any experiences of contacting the dead, I'm definitely open to hearing them. Leave them in the comments. If you think I'm absolutely nuts for doing this and you want to tell me, you could also leave that in the comments. I don't mind. I have thick skin. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm always open to discussion. And I guess if you've been on this channel for any amount of time, you see that I'm very active in the comments and that I'm an open-minded person. So let me know. If you liked it, make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, subscribe to my channel. I put out astrology videos every single week, and I will see you in the next one.